Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values, preserved over time, have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
In our headlines on this Thursday, November 27th, here in South Korea. A major milestone is marked in South Korea's space ambitions as its homegrown Nuri rocket soars into space for a fourth successful mission today, placing a total of 13 satellites into orbit. Meanwhile, the Bank of Korea is maintaining its interest rate at 2.5% for the fourth policy session in a row amid concerns over currency volatility and financial stability. And in northern Hong Kong, a fatal fire races through several high-rise residential towers starting Wednesday afternoon, killing dozens of people and leaving hundreds unaccounted for.
5, 4, 3, 2, 엔진 점화.
We start with some exciting news here on the local front as South Korea marks yet another milestone in its space mission as its homegrown Nuri space rocket successfully soars into space in the wee hours of this Thursday for a fourth flight and places 13 satellites into orbit. Our correspondent Park Gonu has the highlights.
3, 2, 1. Off Korea's homegrown Nuri rocket goes, soaring into space for its fourth mission. Lifting off from Gyeonggung County in Jeollanam province in the country's southwest at 1:13 a.m. on Thursday. This liftoff came 18 minutes later than scheduled, after an abnormal signal was detected in the umbilical retraction pressure sensor. But despite concerns over the delay, Nuri thundered into the sky with confidence, as if proving itself once again. The mission's success was confirmed about 90 minutes later as the main satellite among the 13 satellites on board reached an orbit of 601.3 kilometers, well within the 600-kilometer target in the 6% error range.
Following the successful third launch, the fourth mission has further strengthened Nuri's reliability and reaffirmed Korea's autonomous space development capabilities. Nuri will conduct 2 additional flights through 2027 to enhance its technical stability and performance.
He added that Korea will also push forward with the next-generation launch vehicle, building on the technology and experience gained from the Nuri program. And beyond its success, this fourth launch drew special attention as it was the first time Nuri ever flew at night. As this marks the first nighttime launch among all previous Nuri rocket projects, today's mission has even greater significance, providing ideal conditions for the main satellite to observe auroras. Launching at night was intentional, as nighttime conditions helped the main satellite enter the perfect orbit for aurora observation. The mission also saw more satellites than ever before, 13 in total, up from the 7 carried in the previous launch 2.5 years ago. Adding to the milestone, this fourth vehicle was manufactured entirely by the private company Hana Aerospace, marking a major step in Korea's shift toward a private sector-driven launch system and a deeper transfer of space technology. With today's achievement, excitement is already building for the next 2 Nuri missions in the coming years, in 2026 and 2027. Park Gonu, Arirang News, Kohun.
President Lee Jae-myung has urged his aides to promptly draw up a comprehensive plan to turn the diplomatic pledges from his latest overseas trip into tangible courses of action. During a weekly meeting earlier on this Thursday, he also pointed out that leaders in the UAE, Egypt, South Africa and Turkey voiced much interest in bolstering defense partnership with South Korea. That being said, he further vowed to boost global cooperation in high-tech industries and culture. The Bank of Korea is maintaining its benchmark interest rate at 2.5% for the fourth policy session in a row amid concerns over currency volatility and financial stability. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young reports.
The Bank of Korea has once again held its key interest rate at 2.5%, continuing with its easing cycle pause for a fourth straight meeting amid rising concerns over currency volatility and financial stability risks. This decision follows the final Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year on Thursday.
Although inflation has inched higher and uncertainty over the growth outlook persists, consumption and exports continue to improve, and financial stability risks remain. Given these conditions, we judge that maintaining the current policy rate while closely assessing domestic and external developments is appropriate.
The move comes as the Korean won has slipped into the upper 1,400 won range against the dollar, a 7-month low. Officials say a rate cut could add pressure to the currency amid uncertainty about U.S. monetary policy and strong dollar demand from overseas investment. Household debt and house prices, especially in the Seoul metropolitan area, also remain key concerns. On the same day, the central bank also released its updated economic outlook. It now expects the economy to grow 1% this year and 1.8% next year, slightly higher than its August forecast.
We expect exports and facilitated investment to grow more than initially forecast, largely due to the conclusion of the Korea-U.S. trade negotiations and a strong global semiconductor market. On the consumption side as well, expansionary fiscal policy and improving economic sentiment are expected to accelerate the pace of recovery.
Even so, the bank cautions that uncertainty remains, particularly regarding the global trade environment and the speed of the semiconductor recovery. Inflation is now projected at 2.1% for both this year and next year, reflecting the weaker won and a modest pickup in domestic demand. The bank expects inflation to stay above its 2% target for now, with the outlook hinging largely on exchange rate movements and global energy prices. The Korea-U.S. key rate gap currently stands at 1.5%. With the U.S. Federal Reserve meeting next month, markets are watching closely for any shift in U.S. rate policy. The Bank of Korea is maintaining a cautious stance, and while rate cuts remain on the table, any further move will depend on growth, inflation, and financial stability in the coming months. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's largest search engine and the operator of the country's biggest crypto exchange intend to invest almost $7 billion over the next 5 years to build a financial infrastructure based on AI and blockchain. Our Lee Jin explains.
Naver, the operator of South Korea's largest internet portal, its fintech subsidiary Naver Financial, which handles the country's largest annual payment volume of over 30 trillion won, and Dunamu, the operator of the country's biggest crypto exchange, Upbit, held a joint press conference Thursday morning and said they will invest 10 trillion Korean won, or nearly $7 billion over the next 5 years, as they seek to better respond to rapidly changing global tech trends. This announcement follows each of the three companies holding board meetings on Wednesday to approve the merger that would incorporate Dunamu into the Naver Group through a comprehensive stock swap, and said they will consolidate each company's capabilities to pursue global expansion. The three companies said they plan to work together on designing a next-generation financial infrastructure that combines AI and blockchain technology, intending to establish a new platform that extends beyond payments that can cover the broader financial sector and even everyday lifestyle services. When the merger of the three companies is completed, the deal will create a mega fintech company with a combined value of 20 trillion won. The merger would extend Naver's influence from search, content, e-commerce, and fintech into the cryptocurrency sector. Lee Jin, Arirang News.
A decades-long principle separating banks and big businesses is under fierce debate here in South Korea as the country hopes to see an astronomical expansion in the size of investments into artificial intelligence. Our Kim Do-yeon covers the points of contention.
The separation of banks and commerce is nearly a century-old worldwide law effective for 43 years in South Korea. The rule is simple. Industrial companies cannot own banks. It was established to prevent powerful conglomerates from treating financial affiliates as private ATMs, stopping them from risking depositors' money for reckless expansion. But the sheer cost of the AI and semiconductor war is forcing a rethink. The debate reignited last month after President Lee Jae-myung met with OpenAI CEO Sam Altman alongside the leaders of Samsung Electronics and SK Group. Following the meeting, President Lee hinted at deregulation, suggesting that without massive capital injections, the nation's strategic industries could fall behind. However, the opposition is fierce and organized. Civic groups, including the Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice and Economic Reform Solidarity, argue that loosening these rules is a dangerous regression. They warn that deregulation could destabilize the financial system and deepen the concentration of economic power. Specifically, critics point out that this looks like a tailored favor for the SK Group. Unlike other conglomerates, SK faces unique investment limitations under its current holding company structure. Opponents argue that altering a fundamental economic law to solve the liquidity issues of a single conglomerate constitutes unfair bias. Government regulators are also pumping the brakes. Fair Trade Commission Chair Ju Byung-gi cautioned against shaking the backbone of the economic system. But the industry argues that government funds alone are a drop in the bucket. Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chairman and SK Group Chair Choi Tae-won says the current system cannot handle the costs of the future and that he wasn't trying to repeal banking and commerce laws. He emphasized the funds needed. A single gigawatt scale data center costs 70 trillion won to build. Meanwhile, the US and China are planning hundreds of them.
Our message is being distorted, as if we are just complaining about a lack of funds or demanding that the separation of banking and commerce be scrapped. That is not our intention. We are simply asking for a new system capable of handling this scale of investment.
The ruling Democratic Party has proposed a compromise allowing holding companies to establish special purpose vehicles for strategic investments. Policymakers now face a critical test: how to fuel the engines of AI growth without dismantling the financial safety rails that have protected the economy for decades. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
A plenary session began at the National Assembly this afternoon to address a number of bills, including a high-profile motion for the arrest of the former floor leader of the main opposition party. For the latest there, we connect now to our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun. Hae-ryun, welcome. Let's start with the motion against Chu Kyung-ho. What can you tell us?
Good afternoon, Sunny. A vote on the motion to arrest former floor leader Chu Kyung-ho of the People Power Party took place during the plenary session today, which began at 2 p.m. The vote on the motion, conducted by anonymous secret ballot, passed with 172 votes in favor, 4 against, 2 abstentions, and 2 invalid ballots out of 180 lawmakers present. Chu is accused of interfering with the National Assembly's vote to lift last year's December 3rd martial law declaration. Under the Constitution, sitting lawmakers are protected from arrest or detention during a session unless the Assembly gives consent. When prosecutors request an arrest warrant for a sitting member during a session, a motion to arrest is submitted to the Assembly. For the motion to pass, a majority of all lawmakers must be present, and a majority of those present must vote in favor. Since the ruling Democratic Party supported the motion and holds the majority of seats, this outcome was widely expected. With the motion approved, Chu will undergo a hearing at the court where he will face a pre-arrest interrogation to determine whether a detention warrant will be issued, a session expected to be scheduled for early next month.
Right, I see. Before you head off, Arirang, do tell us a bit about the other bills on the agenda at this plenary session.
So, other than the motion to arrest 7 public welfare bills were also on the agenda. This includes the likes of what's been dubbed the K-Steel Act, as it includes establishing a presidential committee on bolstering South Korea's competitiveness in the steel industry and providing subsidies, loans and tax benefits for green steel technology development and investment. Originally, the DP had pushed to pass around 90 such bills, but a compromise to take up the remaining bills alongside the national budget on December 2nd was reached with the PPP this afternoon. National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik urged both parties to prioritize people's livelihoods over political disputes as the deadline approaches to process next year's budget bill.
Instead of sparring, I ask both parties to do their best until the end to secure every possible budget for the people.
And this comes amid high tensions between the two parties over a push for a parliamentary investigation into a real estate scandal in Seongnam's Daejangdong district during President Lee Jae-myung's tenure as mayor. And that's all I have for now, so back to you, Sunny.
All right, Arirang, thank you for the latest at the National Assembly. Moving on then, South Korea's Coup and Cheonghae units will remain committed to their overseas missions for another year. This extension of deployment until the end of 2026 follows related approval by the National Assembly Defense Committee on this Thursday. The Coup unit was dispatched to the United Arab Emirates in 2011 to strengthen cooperation between the two countries. The Cheonghae unit was dispatched to the Gulf of Aden in 2009 under a UN Security Council resolution and has been extended to ensure safety along major maritime routes and to expand defense cooperation with partners like the European Union. In other news, a ferocious fire engulfed a compound of high-rise residential towers in northern Hong Kong, killing dozens of people and leaving hundreds missing. Our Park Jun-han has more.
At least 55 people have died and hundreds are still missing after a major fire tore through several high-rise residential buildings in Hong Kong's northern Tai Po neighborhood. Authorities expect that the death toll may rise as many people who were recovered are severely injured, as well as those still missing. The fire broke out on Wednesday at the Wong Puk Court housing complex, a cluster of 8 blocks with almost 2,000 apartments, which are home to more than 4,600 residents, nearly 40% of them elderly. Hundreds of residents had to be evacuated after the fire spread across 7 of the 8 towers. While the direct cause of the fire is unknown, investigators claim that certain materials on the building's exterior walls did not meet fire resistance criteria. In what appears to be the city's deadliest fire since World War II, the authorities said they will make every effort to halt the blaze.
I take this incident with the utmost seriousness. I have instructed all government departments and units to make every effort on multiple fronts. Our top priority is to extinguish the fire and rescue the trapped residents.
As the search for missing persons in the ongoing fire continues, Chinese leader Xi Jinping expressed his condolences and has allocated 2 million yuan, or around 410 million Korean won, to Red Cross emergency aid. The U.S. Consulate General in Hong Kong and Macau and the British Foreign Secretary offered their condolences on social media to those affected by the deadly fire. As the fire spread in what the authorities described as an unusual manner, a criminal investigation was launched, and 3 men from the building's construction company were arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. They include 2 directors and a consultant accused of gross negligence. While rescue efforts are still ongoing, evacuated survivors are painfully awaiting the fate of their missing loved ones. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, authorities there say a targeted shooting has critically hurt 2 members of the U.S. National Guard who were on patrol. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Authorities in the U.S. say a suspect is in custody after 2 members of the National Guard were shot on Wednesday in a busy area of downtown Washington, D.C., not far from the White House. The incident prompted an immediate lockdown of the building, although President Donald Trump was in Florida at the time. The shooting unfolded during the late afternoon when foot traffic and government activity in the area were still heavy. An officer from the D.C. Metropolitan Police said a back and forth had occurred after the suspect turned a corner and opened fire at the National Guard members. FBI Director Kash Patel said both guardsmen are in a critical condition. The motive behind the attack also remains unknown, and investigators are now reviewing surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses who were in the area at the time. The suspect was taken into custody after he was shot and subdued by other guard members nearby.
On a somber note, we had, and some of you may have seen this on your phones or on social media, but apparently there was a shooting outside the White House just a couple of hours ago. And we're still learning everything. We still don't know the motive. There's a lot that we haven't yet figured out. But
Speaking to troops in Kentucky on Wednesday, Vice President J.D. Vance called on anyone who's a person of faith to say a prayer for the two National Guardsmen. Tourists close to the crime scene were also caught up in the incident as shots were fired in an area that's heavily secured.
I was walking around and I was trying to get to the White House, and I see all the guns drawn and I see all the weapons and I see all the Secret Service out, and I was like, okay, something happened. So what happened?
Authorities say the area around the White House has returned to normal operations, but the investigation is expected to remain active for some time. Federal and local agencies are coordinating to determine whether the shooter acted alone, what led to the encounter, and whether the victims were targeted specifically or were caught in a broader confrontation. 이승재, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In West Africa, officers from Guinea-Bissau's military declared they had seized power after gunfire erupted on Wednesday near the presidential palace in the capital ahead of the announcement of presidential election results. Government sources told the BBC that President Umaro Sissoco Embalo was detained, along with his election challenger Fernando Diaz, former Prime Minister Domingos Pereira, and Interior Minister Boche Kande. Officers appeared on state television announcing that they had suspended the electoral process, closed the country's borders, and imposed a nighttime curfew. They said they acted to prevent what they called an attempt by unnamed politicians, backed by a well-known drug baron, to destabilize the country. The generals leading the takeover also detained the chief of the army and his deputy. Guinea-Bissau has experienced multiple coups or attempts over the past 5 decades. In Thailand, authorities declared the southern province of Songkhla a disaster zone after days of torrential rain left at least 33 people dead and thousands stranded. Officials said flooding has hit 9 southern provinces, affecting more than 2 million people and forcing 13,000 into shelters on Wednesday. The city of Hat Yai has been one of the worst hit, with floodwaters rising up to 2 meters after record rainfall. Thailand's military has deployed aircraft and boats to deliver medicine, food, and water as emergency teams report being overwhelmed by calls for help. In Peru, a court sentenced former President Martin Vizcarra to 14 years in prison for taking bribes worth more than $600,000 during his time as governor of Moquegua. The court also issued a 9-year ban on holding public office on Wednesday. Vizcarra says he will appeal, calling the ruling, quote, revenge, but officials say he is expected to begin serving his sentence immediately. He joins several other former Peruvian presidents already jailed in corruption cases, highlighting the country's ongoing political instability. In the U.S., a loggerhead sea turtle that drew more than 100 million views online during life-saving treatment in the Florida Keys was released back into the ocean on Wednesday. The turtle named Molly had been rescued from a crab trap line and had a massive tumor weighing approximately 4.6 kilos removed during a 3-hour surgery. According to the Key West Turtle Hospital, Molly is the first loggerhead of her size to survive such a removal. Staff says her recovery marks a major breakthrough in treating the virus-driven disease. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Rain and snow have been falling in most parts of the country today. While about 5 to 20 millimeters of rain is expected, heavy snow of up to 10 centimeters will also pile up in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province. Therefore, heavy snow advisories have been issued in some parts of Gangwon-do province. After the rain and snow stop tonight, freezing temperatures will cover the whole country tomorrow morning. The temperature in Seoul will plummet sharply below 0 to -1 degrees Celsius, and it will be cold throughout inland areas. With strong wind warnings in place, coastal areas and mountainous areas will be even colder with gusty winds. Tomorrow morning will be cold nationwide with Chuncheon at -4, Daejeon at 0 degrees. During the day, temperatures will rise to around 10 degrees in most parts of the country. For the time being, temperatures will go up and down, so please take good care of your health. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up now is our daily panel session on the country's latest space mission.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유의 따뜻함과 약간 사람의 목소리 같은 목소리를 갖고 있거든요, 바이올린이. 저는 무대에 올랐을 때보다는 이제 혼자 연습할 때 더 큰 희열을 느끼는데 제가 표현하고자 하는 음악이 잘 나왔을 때 그때 가장 큰 기쁨을 느끼는 것 같아요. 그래서 저만의 색깔을 어떻게 하면 찾아갈 수 있을까 그걸 제일 많이 고민하는 것 같아요. 아무래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
South Korea's homegrown Nuri space rocket places more than a dozen satellites into orbit on Thursday, marking a fourth successful mission. We have more on this latest launch and its implications today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Thursday, November 27th here in South Korea, and this particular day is also going down in history to mark another advancement in South Korea's space ambitions as the country's Nuri space rocket was launched successfully for the fourth flight to place 13 satellites into orbit in the wee hours of this Thursday. For more on this latest launch and other stories, I have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid here in the studio. Rafael, welcome back.
Good to be here.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Rafael, let's begin then with the foreign media coverage of South Korea's latest space launch.
Yeah, I think international media coverage of this morning's Nuri launch, I think, was remarkably positive, with major wires or outlets emphasizing South Korea's growing space capabilities, ambitions, and also strategic positioning in the Asia region. The Associated Press highlighted that this was South Korea's largest satellite launched in what it termed an ambitious space mission. Then we also had Reuters that focused on the successful deployment of both the main satellite and also the 12 microsatellites. I think the coverage, essentially framed this launch within the context of maybe regional competition as well. The AP noted that the future launches are designed to advance the country's space technologies and industries and also reduce the reliance on other nations, but also to close the gap with other Asian powers, notably China, India, and Japan. So I think this kind of competitive framing appears to be key in international reporting because, of course, many countries around the world have their own space industries. And I think they paid a lot of attention to of course, the technological or technical specifications and scientific capabilities. We saw the AP described how the main satellite carries a wide range airglow camera to observe auroral activity and separate systems for measuring plasma and magnetic fields, and also for the testing of how life science experiments perform in space. So that will be very exciting to see, if and when we get the results. So I think there was a bit of also, coverage on the smaller CUBE satellites that were developed by university teams, and these smaller satellites include GPS systems for atmospheric studies and also infrared cameras to track plastics in the oceans around the world. So I think this was also presented as South Korea's kind of comprehensive kind of scientific or space research agenda. And also, I think there was a little bit of talk about South Korea's kind of journey coming here, not relying too much on others, because, of course, in the past, South Korea has relied on other nations for its launches of satellites since the 1990s, notably the US. So I think this kind of technological advancement and development has been heavily emphasized. Again, South Korea's persistence, and I'm sure that there will be a lot more interest in this kind of industry in South Korea going forward.
Right. Here on the local front, Colin, this latest launch made a bit of headlines because it was the first by a private company, that is Hanwha Aerospace. This being said, what is the significance of South Korea joining the so-called new space era of private entity space explorations?
Yes, this has been the narrative of space exploration as we get deeper into the 21st century. In the 20th century, the U.S. was, still is leading the way in space exploration, but it was really, along with the Soviet Union, the only game in town for a while there. And it was all about NASA, the state space organization, the state space agency. And they were handling everything. From any kind of mission it was, a satellite launched, whatever it might be, they were doing it all. And as time went on, it became more diversified in how these projects were handled. It wasn't just NASA, it was also private enterprise. And most recently, in the 21st century, I believe launched in 2002, the company SpaceX, famously founded by Elon Musk, which takes the bulk of the attention these days as far as space-related news in the U.S., space industry-related news in the U.S. They sort of suck the air out of the room. People wonder, is NASA still around? It's to that extent. They are still around, and in fact, SpaceX works with NASA a great deal, and the U.S. government in general. That's where their contracts come from in large part, but this is the way it's been going in the U.S., sort of from only public to public-private partnership to, you're seeing more and more of the burden being taken on by private enterprise. And so it has happened in Korea as well on a much more compressed timeline. The Korean space program goes back to actually the 1950s in a way, if you want to take the longest possible view, but really since the 1980s with the formation of what was then called KIRA, the space agency here in Korea. Now it's KASA, rebranded last year. And it was KASA and Hanwha Aerospace that has handled this latest launch of the Nuri, the latest version of the Nuri. And the Nuri has been a sort of long-term project as well. Multiple different rockets launched in different years. And over time, over these launches, more and more of the work has been transferred to Hanwha Aerospace. So it's becoming more and more privatized, you could say, with further planned technology transfers ahead of us. So this is not the last we've heard of Hanwha taking over more of the job of Korean space launches, but also there are startups run by sort of KAIST students and other young space professionals. So it is a more diverse space than you might think. But this whole story, it brings back a memory of an earlier Nuri launch. I happened to see, I was walking through the Uljuro Jiha Bodo, if you know where that is, the underground walkway downtown. And there's a lot of sort of old school shops there and cafes, mostly patronized by older people. And I happened to be walking through there as the TVs were all tuned in to this first successful Nuri launch. And all of these people were watching. Their sort of eyes were fixed on the TVs down there. And I was thinking, boy, these people of this generation, Koreans of this generation, they experienced a country that was poorer than sub-Saharan Africa. And now they're watching rocket launches on TV. That's not bad at all.
We've come a long way.
Come a long way, yes.
Raphael, could you tell us a bit about the size of the global space market and where do competing countries currently stand?
Yeah, I think the global space economy as a whole has reached an extraordinary scale, especially over the past, decade or 2 decades. The industry itself, I mean, there are different estimates out there, but some say it's anywhere between $500 and $600 billion, with commercial activities now accounting for roughly 80% of the total industry value in 2024. And also looking ahead, we're seeing projections saying that there will be dramatic expansion in this industry. Some put a price tag of $2 trillion by 2040, making space one of the fastest growing economic sectors globally. So of course, I think this is one of the reasons why South Korea is so keen to kind of get its foot in the door. But of course, when we look more closely, this kind of competitive landscape actually reveals, quite a stark concentration when it comes to just a handful of nations. Of course, the US, as Colin has just pointed out, I think maintains overwhelming dominance in this sector, commanding around 60% of global government space budgets at around $80 billion last year. And also, of course, American companies are attracting a bulk of the private investments, 60% of global space investments. And of course, again, as Colin mentioned, we can't not talk about SpaceX, which is responsible for the majority of US launches last year. Of course, after the US, we have China that has emerged as the clear kind of second-tier power, holding around 15% of global government space budgets at approximately $20 billion. And again, this has grown rapidly, considering that this spending was only around 2% in the year 2000. And also Beijing had conducted around, I think it was 68 launches just last year. And again, plenty more investment in the private sector. Then when we move to the mid-tier level, we have Japan that commands about 5% of this global budget spending, at around $7 billion, and then we have Russia at around $4 billion, then we have France. But of course, when we talk about Russia, it's unclear how Moscow's role will be going over the next few years because of of course, due to the sanctions, the war in Ukraine. Then, of course, we have India that presents an interesting case. They're investing heavily and also getting a lot of private investments. Then we have South Korea. At the moment, the budget is around just over $1 billion. But I think, they're already ranking around in the top 10 globally. But the Korea Space Agency, the KASA, has set ambitious targets for South Korea to become a top 5 space power by the year 2045, aiming to have kind of 10% of the global market share, worth approximately $300 billion. But, this would, of course, rival the semiconductor industry as well. So I think certainly there's a lot of competition around the world, but also in this region, but also a lot of ambition.
Right. And speaking about South Korea, Raphael, quite a number of observers have chosen to connect South Korea's advances in space exploration to the efforts made by North Korea. What do you believe perhaps are the broader implications of this comparison, this connection?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of analysts have been frequent in comparing South Korea and North Korea's space programs. And I think this also reflects deeper geopolitical kind of complexities in the region, beyond the technological capabilities, regardless of which side of the border we're talking about. Both nations are pursuing space capabilities, but I think this is through fundamentally different lenses. South Korea seeks technological dependence, of course, and regional monitoring capabilities, whilst I think North Korea's efforts in the space industry serve strategic goals, including surveillance on adversaries, and also enhanced targeting potential for its nuclear arsenal. So I think this connection, in a way, I understand why people make such a connection, but this also maybe it kind of intensifies regional kind of security dynamics in ways, for example, the race to develop reconnaissance satellites, of course, and this might escalate surveillance competition in the region. So, I do think that this, in the long run, I don't want to talk too negatively, but it could create kind of new dynamics or even miscalculations that could potentially maybe destabilize the peninsula. Of course, North Korea's space program and efforts are aided by Russia, and I think this also again poses security threats not only to South Korea but also to the United States and to Japan, of course, and other allied countries. So it's only natural in a way for South Korea to respond, strengthening domestic satellite programs and also forging tighter space alliances around the world that it is currently doing. So I think this kind of space competition, it also, in a way, South Korea finds itself again in the middle. It deepens kind of broader great power competition. South Korea's achievements, of course, in the past have been linked very strongly to the United States' strategic interests and, of course, a lot of collaboration with the United States, whereas we have North Korea, of course, seeking technology transfers from Russia, if not China. So, of course, the dynamics exists in this part of the world, in Northeast Asia, as we kind of get. We have the competition, of course, when it comes to military, but now it's also kind of extending to the space industry as well. Of course, South Korea will face plenty of challenges going ahead, being a relatively kind of, not being the earliest entrant into the market. And also South Korea does have challenges when it comes to its kind of hub strategy, manufacturing in one place, launches here, research there. Many complexities and challenges ahead, but also because this is such a kind of fresh era when it comes to space technologies. I think South Korea also might have, an edge, a leading edge when it comes to this kind of global market.
All right, I suppose we'll find out going forward then. Colin, let's move on to another issue of interest. Now, this year's UN Climate Change Conference, better known as COP30, came to an end last week. K-pop fans made quite a bit of headlines. For the sake of our viewers who may not have come across such coverage, could you tell us what these headlines were about and your thoughts regarding them, of course?
Yes, K-pop fans got some attention there at the 30th such conference, UN Climate Change Conference. And this is not the first time that K-pop has had a bit of a connection to this conference. I think in the 26th conference, Blackpink, the actual girl group, made videos in support of what was going on at this conference. Of course, dealing a conference about what actions to take regarding climate change, obviously. But this was more informal. This was not official. This was K-pop fans. K-pop fans for Climate Action was the name of the group. They had signs. They had costumes. They were dressed as K-pop Demon Hunters characters, I believe, or inspired by K-pop Demon Hunters, K-daehon, as we say here. They had, let me think, what was the sign they had? Export K-pop, not fossil fuels. That was one of them. So they were going with the theme. And they were making a splash, and they were also reflecting one element of the conference itself, which was that there was a panel, an actual panel as part of the conference on K-pop and climate action. And you might think, well, what do these two have to do with each other? In a sense, they are natural. It's a natural fit because K-pop fans are very willing to be mobilized for their causes. And certain causes that are in the news or in society or on social media in the discourse do get picked up by K-pop fans. And when word spreads through their groups, through their social connections, through their online forums, they get on it. And whether that could be, a domestic issue like the impeachment of Yoon Suk-yeol, or whether it's a foreign issue like in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement, that was a big K-pop fan adopted cause as well. So in a way, climate change is a perfect, it makes perfect sense as the kind of cause they would champion. And so, they've got the slogans, they have the signs, and in Brazil this year they had the venue. So we'll see if they keep it up in future conferences. But the how to put it, bundle of issues K-pop fans are speaking on collectively is growing wider and wider, and it tells you something about K-pop fandom, more so I think than any particular issue, any particular cause, just how the social dynamics work. And not only do they promote their bands, which they certainly do, and that tells you a lot about how these bands have broken foreign charts, the US Billboard chart and whatnot, it also tells you just the way they can wield influence in music or in other spheres as well.
Right, and for the sake of comparison, Raphael, what can you tell us about such campaigns beyond the K-pop arena by fans elsewhere?
Sure, I think this is a really fascinating space, and I think we'll probably see a lot of research and PhDs when it comes to this in the future. And also, Colin has pointed out some of these really interesting points that these K-pop fans are carrying out when it comes to this activism. But I think this kind of fan-driven activism, extends beyond K-pop and also is within entertainment, but also in the sports arena as well. And these fans are kind of developing sophisticated climate and social justice campaigns that operate independently from their beloved or from their respective celebrities. And these movements, they're kind of multi-sector and around the world and different fandoms. If we just look, for example, at Billie Eilish, the music climate revolution, it represents one of the most institutionalized approaches, and it generated some 133,000 verified climate actions by fans during her Happier Than Ever tour, raising over $100,000 for climate causes and organizations. Even if we look, for example, at Coldplay, the band themselves, I think they've done a lot of promo and PR when it comes to kind of reducing their carbon footprint when they go around the world on tours. But they have been maybe technically ambitious, I think, with their Music of the Spheres tour. They installed some kind of kinetic energy floors that harness fan dancing to power concert elements. So of course I think that was quite an interesting one. Also, when it comes to not just music, but even reading books, literature, the Harry Potter Alliance has operated for 2 decades as perhaps one of the longest-running organized fandom kind of activism structures, and they've mobilized fans for literacy, human rights, climate causes, through narrative frameworks from the books. So I think that was quite successful in a way. They've donated over 87,000 books and raised significant funds for disaster relief, kind of basically demonstrating how this kind of group mobilization really can achieve some social good. We've seen movements like that even in football clubs, kind of football fan clubs, and even kind of Taylor Swift fan bases as well also have that kind of stuff going on.
Right, proving that fandoms, of course, they are doing their part in shaping social change. Colin, on a more sobering note, if you will, data shows that a growing number of Koreans in their 20s and 30s are choosing to take a break from their jobs.
Yeah.
What do you suppose are some of the causes behind this phenomenon, and what might be the broader consequences?
Right. Sometimes it's a break, and many times it's quite a long break. The word break may not quite apply so easily when it's years and years of unemployment or sort of semi-employment, doing odd jobs, irregular employment. A lot of these former full-time employees are older than their 20s and 30s. They can be in their 40s. I read a stat that said, I believe it was Koreans born between 1981 and 1986. In that demographic, 30 to 40% still live with their parents, which tells you one reason they're able to quit their jobs is they're not going to starve. They can go home and eat. So they can coast. They're not under huge pressure. And as well, they're usually in Seoul. And the sort of sense is, well, it's too expensive to find a place of my own in Seoul. How can I move out, even if I had a job? And so the coverage of this issue, part of it leans toward, oh, can Seoul be made cheaper? If not, can other regions of the country where jobs could be made more appealing? Can we add more cultural facilities? What can be done to draw younger people out of Seoul so they don't take a week off work and that becomes 10, 20 years. One other concern is their parents who are feeding them. They're wondering when they can retire, and that's going to be a little harder if you have adult children living with you that you need to support indefinitely. And so these are all a sort of connected bundle of issues that reflect deeper currents in South Korean society, but it's produced as often a vogue word, a term that I think viewers might enjoy. It's called Gaenguruchok, which means kangaroo tribe. And the idea is the image of the kangaroo mother with the joey, I believe it's called, in the pouch. Well, these are the kids who never leave the pouch, or they go back to the pouch. And a fitting image, I think, for a trend that is troublesome on several different levels.
Right, and it is a social concern that the government also is trying to address, of course. All right, Colin, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Raphael, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.